Hello everyone. So today we're going to talk about the last and final review lesson, which is review lesson number 7. And the first we're going to talk about is lobes of the brain. And you can see that this is a human brain and it is functionally divided into different lobes. And imagine this person is facing this way and he's looking at this direction right here. So this is the front, and that is why we call the frontal lobe, which is shaded orange. And this is the part that controls the motor activities, which is the physical activities, problem solving, especially your mathematical intelligence and the speech production. Those things are, this is the zone that controls that part. And right behind the frontal lobe, we have a parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is responsible for touch perception, which is pretty much, it is called somatosensory cortex, and body orientation and sensory discrimination. So those things are controlled by the parietal. And if you look at the back of the head, we call the occipital lobe. And this is the region that controls the sight, which is our optic nerve is processed. It reaches here and processed here. Visual cortex we call, and visual reception and visual interpretation. So what do you see is actually interpreted and processed right here. And on the side of the brain, we call temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is pretty much next to the ear, right behind the ear. So that is the auditory processing unit, and this is where we recognize the language, comprehension, and memory, information retrieval, and all that is right here. Then we have the brain stem, which is located right here. The brain stem is nothing but the extent down as a spinal cord, and this is the as, medulla oblongata. And also this part is, so medulla oblongata is actually responsible for involuntary responses. Anything that is not controlled by our will or wish is controlled by this part, which is called the brain stem. Right behind the brainstem, we have cerebellum. It's a small unit, and this small part is so important because it's mainly responsible for the balance and coordination. So again, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. That's the lobes of the brain. Now we're going to talk about quickly look at the male reproductive system, and what you see here is the different parts, and I'm going to quickly go over the functions. And the testis is located right here, and the main function of the testis is to produce the sperm and testosterone. And then right outside of the testis, the seminiferous tubules come out and form a crown of tubules right here called epididymis. And the function of epididymis is it matures and stores the sperm, and then it will be ready for ejaculation. And the third part is the sperm duct. The sperm duct is right here, this yellow tube which is coming out, and the sperm duct is also called vas deferens. It carries the sperms from epididymis all the way out through this tube, and it right here it reaches and opens out through the urethra. So that is a sperm duct. Then the next part is the seminal vesicles, Cowper's gland, and prostate gland. And these three structures, these are glands that produces a seminal fluid which feeds the sperm and allows them to swim. It creates that fluid so that the sperm can be active, and the sperm and the seminal fluid are collectively we call the semen. So right here we have seminal vesicle, and then prostate gland right here, and I believe the Cowper's gland is not labeled here. So they produce pretty much the semen, which is the fluid. Next is the urethra. Urethra is the opening which is coming out right here through the penis, and that is that it allows the passage of either urine or sperm, because urinary system, which is right here, you can see the urinary bladder, which is this gray, brownish gray area, and that opens out through the urethra as well. And then penis places the sperm inside the body of the female, and then the last part is the scrotum. Scrotum is right here. It protects the testis, and it's the main important part is to keep the testis at the lower temperature, which is around 35 degrees Celsius, and that's the optimum temperature for the sperms to develop and for the meiosis to occur. And that's why it is not kept inside the body. That's to maintain this temperature a little bit lower than the surrounding. So the next is the female reproductive system. Female reproductive system, we can see that and this is the largest organ in the female reproductive system, which is the uterus, and on both sides of the uterus we have fallopian tube, and the fallopian tube ends with two structures on both sides called the ovary, and ovary is connected to the fallopian tube with finger-like projections called the fimbriae. And then this is the uterus, where that's where the embryo is implanted, and then you can see the cervical region right here, and this is the vagina. So the ovary is the main part of the female reproductive system, and the main function is it produces the egg or ova to produce the hormone estrogen and progesterone, which controls the female characteristics. The next is the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube is also called the oviduct. It's right here, this tube right here. It connects the ovary to the uterus, and it catches the egg, which is released from the ovary, and transported to the uterus. That's the function. For and also the fertilization happens in the tube, not in the uterus. It is actually in the fallopian tube. Just make sure you remember that. Next is the uterus. Uterus is the an organ which is made up of a very strong muscles, and it's going to hold the baby. And site for implantation, you can see the embryo is implanted right here. Hold the developing embryo has a lining called the endometrium. The inner lining of the uterus is called endometrium, enriched with blood vessels to nourish the embryo, and it forms the placenta. Placenta is the connection between embryo and the uterus. Last part is the vagina. It allows the entry of the sperm and exit of the baby at birth. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the factors affecting the blood flow through the cardiovascular system. So what you can see right here, these are the 5 factors that affect the blood flow in our body. The first one is blood pressure, then the blood volume, then the resistance, diseases, and exercise. The first we're going to talk about the blood pressure, and look at the chart right here. 120/80 is a normal blood pressure, which is in millimeter mercury, according to American Heart Association. So 80 is the diastolic pressure, which means when the heart is relaxing. 120 is the systolic pressure. That's the time where heart is pumping the blood. So that is a normal. And the pre-hypertension is 120 to 130 or over 80 to 90, somewhere in this area. And then high blood pressure is right here, and then this is super high, and you can see here this is intensive care. So that's the blood pressure. So what causes when we have the different blood pressure in the blood vessels, higher the pressure, more blood is going to flow through that. So another second factor is the blood volume, how much blood you have. When we have more blood, like if you have a body that retain a lot of water in the blood, so what happens normally is because of the too much blood you have, it's going to create pressure inside the blood vessel. Another one is the resistance. The resistance can be caused by either any kind of plaque deposition. Right here, you can see that this is the normal artery, and you can see here there's a yellow colored structure, which is nothing but the fat or the cholesterol. So that is depositing inside the artery and reducing the lumen or the size of the artery inside the cavity. And then you can see that the narrowed artery because of the plaque, and this is the normal artery. So it's going to be high pressure. So it is going to create high resistance. Blood is going to it's limited by this flow because of the high resistance by the wall and reduced diameter. Next is the disease, and this is conditions called atherosclerosis, which is called deposition of the fat inside the arteries. The next one is exercise. It is normal for anybody when you do any exercise. The heart is pumping a lot of blood, and that normally elevates the blood pressure. And then after a few minutes, it will come back to normal. And this is another image. This is a real image where the plaque is deposited inside the artery. And the last and final is our body's immune system. How are we protected against infection? So there are 3 line of defense that we have. The first line of defense is pretty much non-specific. It's like a general protection that we have. Natural barriers which restrict the entry of the pathogen. Example like the skin and the mucous membrane, and these are some of the areas that we have to protect against from the pathogen. The second one is the second line of defense. The second line of defense is pretty much more towards the specific immune response. If a bacteria enter into our body, immediately our body recognizes and elevate the temperature. That's called a fever. And also the body's white blood cells, or we call them phagocytes. There are two types given here: macrophages and neutrophils. They just come and eat them. They just come and catch them and eat them. So they are a little bit more specific. And another thing is inflammation. When we get a cut, you know, the more blood is going to flow to that area. There will be swelling, and there's more lymphocytes are going to be there to fight against the entering pathogens. That is called inflammation. And also, the body is going to release a lot of interferon, so to stimulate or to boost our immune response, which is through the fever and all. So these are innate or non-specific immune defenses. That is the second line of defense. The third one is a little bit exactly, precisely against a pathogen. That is called specific immunity. So what you see here is, antigen-specific immune response. That means the best example is when you get a vaccine, our body produces antibodies, and these antibodies are going to stay in our blood, and then if any other pathogen get in, the real pathogen get in, these antibodies will go and fight and destroy those invading pathogen. And the third line of defense is really helpful, to get a specific immunity against a particular pathogen. So that is how those are the three lines of defense in our body to protect against the diseases. So I hope this is helpful. Thank you very much.